Good morning, and thank you for tuning into the Global Current. I'm Alexander Gray.
And I'm Jillian Lope. Today in news, NATO puts 300,000 troops on high alert in Europe.
Protests in Hong Kong against mainland China's decision to prevent 2 elected officials from taking their seats, and 3 American soldiers were killed in Jordan.
In analysis, the impact that the fight to retake Mosul from ISIS control has had on civilians.
And the proposed foreign policy of the upcoming Trump administration.
Then, Emily Livaday brings us an interview with Dr. Sheldon Benjamin of the University of Massachusetts on the subject of the emigration of Soviet Jews during the Cold War.
And now, Joseph Orico reports on NATO's mobilization of 300,000 troops in Europe.
On Monday, November 7th, NATO officials mobilized 300,000 ground units in preparation for conflicts with Russia, The Independent reports. As tensions have been rising between Russia and various European nations, NATO has planned to move 4,000 soldiers to the border of Russia as well. NATO's head military general, Jens Stoltenberg, refused to comment on the number of units that were being put on high alert. However, Britain's NATO military representative, Sir Adam Thompson, said that it would be near 300,000. Sir Adam Thompson also stated that it would take approximately 180 days to move these troops into position. In a CNN interview with Stoltenberg discussed what the plan for the NATO forces was.
My hope and my expectation is that we're going to make very clear decisions related to boosting our collective defense, meaning, for instance, increase the size of the NATO response force, the high readiness force, especially related to maritime and air component and special operation forces.
This large military action has come as a response to not only the annexation of Crimea in 2014, but to the increase in Russian military exercises near Eastern European countries such as Serbia. These actions have made NATO officials wonder if a possible scenario where Russia would try to reform the Soviet Union would become a very serious threat. Despite NATO's major military funding cutbacks at the end of the Cold War, NATO is determined to make sure its force can meet potential Russian aggressions with an appropriate level of force. NATO is hoping that moving its units into Eastern European states will prevent Russia's expansion further into Europe. Russia's aggressive movement into Eastern Europe has caused increasing tension with Western powers, including the UK, France, and the United States of America. These relations with Russia have also deteriorated due to Russia's backing of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, a report from the Daily Mail says. The rising tensions with the superpowers and then the threat of Russian invasion in European states such as Romania and Poland has warranted reaction from NATO. However, this ramp-up of military efforts has not allayed NATO's commanders concerned over the new Russian Armata T-14 battle tank. Russian President Vladimir Putin boasts that these tanks could overpower NATO's standard Challenger 2 battle tank. Many NATO intelligence officers are concerned, confirming that these new super tanks are more powerful than anything NATO has readily available, and blames the budget cuts since the end of the Cold War. This is Joseph Orico reporting for the Global Current.
Up next, Yilin Du brings us a report on Hong Kong protests against mainland China's decision to prevent 2 local politicians from taking their oath to office.
Protesters have assembled to criticize mainland China's action of blocking 2 politicians from taking seats in Hong Kong legislature, according to the New York Times. Mainland China's decision raised tremors among Hong Kong's residents, who fear the city's independent judiciary now falls under threat. Beijing has blocked Sixtus Long and Yua Wai-cheng after they substituted a word for China that is widely seen as derogatory, while taking their oath, according to the New York Times. Many Hong Kong residents believe that there are issues other than Beijing blocking Leung and Cheng from taking seats in legislature. According to the New York Times, even Hong Kong's chief executive, a loyal supporter of Beijing, was willing to leave the decision to Hong Kong's judiciary. Leung and Cheng had agreed to retake the oath, but the mainland government still does not approve their seats in the legislature. During the rally on Sunday, thousands of people walked on the streets of Hong Kong, similar to Hong Kong's pro-democracy demonstration in 2014. During this Sunday's demonstration, Hong Kong police used pepper spray on the protesters. According to the Wall Street Journal, we were trying to occupy Connaught Road, but there were too many police and there were some conflicts between us. They used pepper spray. We tried to step back and fight again, but they kept on spraying, said Haley Lee, 27, an airline cabin crew member. 2 men aged 39 and 57 were arrested during the rally. The demonstration did not end until 1 a.m. Monday morning. In an interview with Al Jazeera, a Hong Kong resident voiced his opposition to mainland China's actions.
It has been destroyed, smeared, taken apart over the past many years. And today, basically, they disregard the whole system. And effectively, the Communist Party are making laws for Hong Kong.
Beijing's ruling of Qing and Liang will be the fifth time that China mainland has interrupted Hong Kong's basic law since the handover from UK in 1997. This is Sheldon Benjamin for the Global Current.
Next this morning, a report by Jacob Abel on the death of 3 American soldiers in Jordan. On Friday, November 4th, 2016, 3 U.S. Army Green Berets tasked with training coalition forces were killed as they approached an airbase in Jordan. The Guardian reports that Jordanian military airbase checkpoint opened fire on the 3 trainers as they continued to approach the airbase without reducing their vehicle's speed. The report has not been completely validated, though, and an investigation into the incident is in progress. The 3 Green Berets have been identified as 27-year-old Staff Sergeant Matthew C. Lewin, 30-year-old Kevin J. McEnroe, and 27-year-old James F. Moriarty. The 3 men were stationed in Jordan in support of Operation Inherent Resolve, the current operation against ISIS. The Washington Post reports that Brett McGirt, who is the White House envoy to the U.S. coalition against Islamic extremism, stated that, quote, "Nothing will come between Jordan and the United States." The Jordanian serviceman was also shot and wounded in an exchange of gunfire between the 2 sides. Jordan is a key member of the U.S. coalition against ISIS and has used airstrikes inside of Syria. Jordan has also received thousands of refugees from the fallout of the Syrian war. Terrorist attacks at training facilities in Jordan have occurred in the past, and so the possibility of this incident being a terrorist attack has not been ruled out. Last year, a Jordanian police officer killed 2 Americans at an international police training center in Jordan when the Jordanian officer opened fire inside of the facility. Following the attack, which occurred last November, State Department spokesman John Kirby announced the deaths. And here's the audio clip.
On today's shooting in Jordan, we can confirm that 2 U.S. citizen trainers were killed and 2 U.S. citizens were wounded in a shooting incident today, as 2 U.S. citizen trainers also wounded. So 2 U.S. trainers killed, 2 U.S. trainers wounded.
This attack occurred in a string of deaths of U.S. special operators around the world. Business Insider reports that 1 Green Beret died while practicing a diving exercise off the coast of Florida last week. On November 3rd, 2 Green Berets were killed while fighting against the Taliban in Afghanistan. This incident is just one of many tragic incidents of U.S. service members losing their lives in support of the operation against ISIS. For the Global Current, this is Alexander Gray, reading for Jacob Abel.
Next up, Eric Crisatelli analyzes the impact that the military campaign has had on civilians.
On October 17th, Iraqi security forces, Kurds armed forces, an array of Sunni and Shia militants, and American advisors began the long-awaited campaign to take back the ISIS stronghold of Mosul in Iraq. Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi declared in a televised statement, "I am announcing today the beginning of these heroic operations to liberate you from the brutality and terrorism of ISIS. God willing, we will meet soon on the ground of Mosul, where we will all celebrate the liberation and your freedom. Mosul has been under the control of ISIS since June of 2014. From there, ISIS established the Caliphate and began its expansion throughout Iraq and Syria. Families in and around the city of Mosul are living in fear and desperation as the military operation to take the city from ISIS continues. There are reports of ISIS using human shields and other tactics to deter the inhabitants from fleeing. One family was able to contact Al Jazeera and said that fleeing the city was not possible in the current situation. Abu Yazan, 36, whose name has been changed fearing reprisals from ISIS, stated that there is no way out for us as families. Even if we think about fleeing the city, that is not possible at the time being. We are being held hostage. ISIL took the whole city of Mosul as hostage," said the father of 3 children. Abu Yazan is one of 1.5 million civilians trapped inside the city as Iraqi, Kurdish, and coalition forces push into Mosul. International aid agencies have warned of the potential consequences for civilian lives.
We had a tragic experience. It was a devastating 2.5 years that was wasted in vain. We witnessed oppression and huge humiliation. Only God can help us now.
Although much of the threat comes from ISIS fighters, human rights organizations have found civilians are also vulnerable to mistreatment by the Iraqi army and the state-sponsored Popular Mobilization Units, PMU. The PMU consists primarily of Shia militants, but also includes Sunni groups and others. It was officially designated part of the Iraqi armed forces in February of 2016, after it took center stage in the fight against ISIS in 2014. The militias have been accused of abducting, killing, and torturing civilians in past operations with the goal of retaking territory from ISIS. Abu Yazan said, "Residents of Mosul hope PMU fighters are not allowed to enter the city. We are trapped. There is no safe place in Mosul. We fear random bombing. We fear for our lives that the sectarian militias enter Mosul." What does control over the city of Mosul mean for both the Islamic State and Iraqi-led forces? In an interview between Siddhartha Mahantana and Michael Knights outlines what the capture of Mosul means for Iraq and the combined joint task force operation Inherent Resolve. Essentially, the mission is to degrade the military threat from ISIS until the Iraqi security forces can efficiently handle it on their own. That benchmark has not been reached presently because ISIS has continued to operate as a major terrorist organization and continues to find safe havens in Iraq's mountainous and desert areas and along the Syria-Iraqi border. The capture of Mosul will turn the civil war in Syria in a new direction. The defeat of ISIS as a territorial power will dramatically rearrange the blood-stained three-dimensional chessboard of the Syrian war. It could potentially benefit the regime of Bashar al-Assad or other rival Islamic militant groups present in the area, such as the major al-Qaeda-linked faction now known as Jabhat Fatah al-Sham. But can ISIS survive or even thrive after the strong challenges and defeats of the Caliphate? Optimists believe the obvious failure of ISIS to restore the purported lost power of the world's Muslims and counter the strength of the West will fatally undermine the group's appeal to potential recruits in both the Islamic world and the West. They identify territorial losses, leading to no taxes being levied by ISIS on oil or other revenue streams, and no space for training, resting, or preparing elaborate and effective propaganda. In contrast, pessimists note that ISIS in previous incarnations survived from about 2007 to 2014 in Iraq without ever controlling significant amounts of territory, and eventually emerged to conduct the single most effective Islamic extremist military campaign seen anywhere in the world for many decades. Only time will tell what the capture of ISIS's last stronghold will mean for the Caliphate, its enemies, and the rest of the world. This is Eric Crisatelli reporting for the Global Current.
And now, Jack LaForge analyzes the proposed foreign policies of President-elect Donald Trump.
On January 20th, 2017, Donald J. Trump will become the 45th President of the United States of America. In a stunning result, Donald Trump is to become the first president in United States history who possesses no military or political experience. With that being said, it is extremely difficult to predict what the new Commander-in-Chief's foreign policy will entail. The only measure we have to predict President-elect Trump's foreign policy is his rhetoric on the campaign trail for the past year and a half. Trump's views on globalization and alliances differed from past presidents and have left Democratic and Republican politicians alike scrambling to cope with the possibilities that stem from his words. On terrorism, President-elect Trump takes an extraordinarily hard line. Donald Trump's first approach would be to capture the oil fields and bomb them in order to quickly remove ISIS from power. In March of 2016, Trump told CBS News that a massive ground force would be needed to defeat ISIS, specifically 20,000 or 30,000 troops. When it comes to Syrian refugees, Trump goes even further. An estimated 11 million refugees had fled their homes since the Syrian civil war broke out. Trump has promised to not only completely avoid accepting Syrian refugees, but has also proposed a plan to temporarily ban those practicing the religion of Islam from entering this country. However, Vice News reports that Trump has removed the proposed Muslim ban from his website as of Wednesday, so it is uncertain if he will actually execute the particular plan once in office. Further on the Syrian conflict, President Bashar al-Assad has since come out publicly and expressed his willingness to cooperate with Donald Trump. Trump has called Assad a bad guy, but expressed hesitance to dethrone Assad and fears that a more horrible leader will rise to power. Trump has praised Russia for conducting airstrikes in Syria against ISIS, even though those merits of those airstrikes were to keep Assad in power. Throughout the campaign, Trump has praised Vladimir Putin's leadership and has expressed hopes that he can work with Russia on many pertinent issues that face the world today. According to CNN, President Putin has reached out to Trump to congratulate him on his victory and publicly shared his willingness to restore ties with the United States. However, the United States is currently aiding the Free Syrian Army, the same army that is the focus on Russian airstrikes in Syria, one of many potential roadblocks on a path to build a strong Russo-American relationship. On the issue of NATO, Trump has called the organization obsolete and proposed that Europe should pay its fair share. Despite originally threatening to leave NATO, Trump has recently taken a different tone.
I had previously said that NATO was obsolete because it failed to deal adequately with terrorism. Since my comments, they have changed their policy and now have a new division focused on terror threats.
In terms of nuclear weapons, Trump's rhetoric has matched the long-standing U.S. foreign policy of avoiding first strike at all costs. Where nuclear proliferation is concerned, Trump has suggested to provide nuclear technology to our allies, specifically Japan, South Korea, and Saudi Arabia, for the purpose of self-defense. However, Trump has also been one of the most outspoken critics of President Obama's Iran deal. Donald Trump's consistent position has been to renegotiate the current deal, whereas his vice president, Mike Pence, has stated that the Iran deal should be completely destroyed within the first 100 days in office.
Never, ever, ever in my life have I seen any transaction so incompetently negotiated as our deal with Iran.
We as a people do not know for sure whether Donald Trump will fulfill all the promises he has made on the campaign trail. What we do know is that many of Trump's proposals have the potential to defy traditional American foreign policy. Whether a Democrat or a Republican has been in office, the U.S. has maintained a stilted relationship with Russia, has not tolerated the presence of erratic dictatorships, and has taken preventative measures against nuclear proliferation. Donald Trump's proposals challenge all three of these traditions, and whether some believe it is for the better or for the worse, the American public must acknowledge that we are in for something new, something different, and something unprecedented. This is Jack LaForge reporting for the Global Current.
Finally this morning, Emily Livaday brings us a discussion with Dr. Sheldon Benjamin on the historical emigration of Soviet Jews during the Cold War.
Good morning, Global Current listeners. This is Emily Livaday, and I am here with Dr. Sheldon Benjamin, Professor of Psychiatry and Neurology at the University of Massachusetts School of Medicine. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So can you first tell me, you were involved in the Soviet Jewry movement. What first inspired you to get involved in that?
I was actually pretty young, maybe about 9 or 10 years old, when I first heard about Jews being kept prisoner in the former Soviet Union, and about the fact that they weren't allowed to leave. And then pretty soon I heard about arrests, and I was kind of intrigued to know, what was causing it, because I actually had not, that was my first contact with the notion that a government would arrest somebody for their political views. It was a time when all around me we were hearing about the early parts of the Vietnam War, and the beginnings of resistance here were forming, and here there were people who were in some distant way related to me, who were being arrested for their views and for their actions, and it just moved me somehow. So,
how old were you when you first got involved?
I was 1964. I was 9 years old.
Wow,
started it off early. Yeah, when I was 11 years old, I was watching the news with my parents and saw that 2 Russian writers had been found guilty of anti-Soviet crimes and were sent to labor camp for having written science fiction and novels and published them on their own abroad. And I couldn't believe that you could be arrested for writing a science fiction book or for writing a novel. And I had to find out who those were, and I went to the library and I began reading their books when I was 11, and that was, I became convinced that these are people that needed our attention, and I was probably an annoying kid who would go around to adults and say, have you heard about these dissident writers in the Soviet Union? They need your help. Or have you heard about Jews that want to leave the Soviet Union? They're being persecuted, and we're sitting here comfortable, and we need to do something. Mm-hmm. So.
How receptive of you were they when you decided you wanted to go to one of these demonstrations? Like, were people very happy to have a young child there, or were they like, maybe you should wait till you're older?
Well, the very first demonstration was in New York in 1964. I wasn't there. The first demonstration I went to was in 1967, I think. And the first demonstration I organized was in 1968. And people were very welcoming.
Really?
By 1968, I was already a teenager, but they were very welcoming, and by '68 I was organizing them, and I was 14 or 15, but adults were coming and participating.
So post-Tsarist Russia, what were they doing to suppress the Jewish people within Russia? What were some of the tactics that they used, and how were they kind of hindering the culture?
So under the Bolshevik regime, under Lenin, essentially all synagogues and Jewish schools were closed in the entire country. And the idea of religion was anathema to the idea of communism in some ways. And so a lot of religions were being suppressed, except for Russian Orthodoxy, which was allowed. The Russian Orthodox Church was allowed. But other religions also were being repressed. The difference was that in the Soviet Union, Judaism was considered a nationality, not a religion. So if you were, if you were trying to be Episcopalian, which didn't happen very often, by the way, in the former Soviet Union, but if you were trying to be Protestant, you would not find public support for those churches, right? Mm-hmm. But if you were Protestant and you were, say, a citizen of Ukraine, you were Ukrainian. If you were Jewish and you were from Ukraine, your passport, you had to carry an internal passport in the former Soviet Union, your passport would say Jew on it as nationality. So all Jews in the former Soviet Union had to carry an internal passport that identified them as a Jew. No other religion had to have that, only Jews. And for instance, Muslims did not have to carry that. If you were Muslim from Tajikistan, you were a Tajik. But if you were Jewish, exclusively, yeah. If you were a Jew from Tajikistan, your passport said Jew. So there was a very high-level official attempt to stop the Jewish religion, and the reasons are probably complicated to get into on a short interview. But so that was what was the context of the Soviet Jewry movement. It was a place where being Jewish in public was a crime. And yet at the same time, people labeled you as a Jew on all of your important documents. So they pointed out to you were Jewish, but it was a crime to do anything in public to demonstrate that.
What was the moment when the Jewish people in the Soviet Russia decided we want to leave? Was there one moment, or was it? Well,
no, there were several moments, but there were probably the biggest one was when the State of Israel was formed and announced that they were open to Jewish refugees coming from around the world. The Jews in the Soviet Union were aware of the devastating losses due to the Holocaust, and they thought, we need to get out of this repressive regime and go to our homeland, right? And so the founding of the State of Israel in 1948 awakened the idea of leaving, but it was impossible to do until the 1970s, when the things that, political pressures were brought on them by people like myself here in the United States to put pressure and try to open up the gates. But the Six-Day War in 1967 in Israel, when the Six-Day War concluded and this small army was able to defend the borders on all sides from these countries, I think there was a real surge of pride by people who were dreaming of leaving for Israel but never thought they could. And I think that when they saw this happen, they felt maybe they could. Maybe they were strong enough to fight this themselves. I think that had something to do with it.
Yeah. What were some of the tactics that you used? Because you were really behind the scenes and on the front lines of this whole thing.
Well, I was one of thousands of people who were doing this. I was not the leader of this at all by any means. There were lots and lots of people like me around the world that were doing this. And my future wife and I, for instance, would above all do person-to-person contacts. We established sort of pen pal relationships with people who were trying to emigrate and who were being held in the Soviet Union. We would send them packages because they had lost their jobs. Once they announced their intention to leave, they would be denounced at work and lose their jobs. So we would send them packages of things they could sell to live on. And then at the same time, we would raise their cases. We would ask our senators and congressmen who had dealings with the Soviet Union, maybe when they went there, to raise their cases with their Soviet colleagues and say, can you do something to help this family get out? So we made person-to-person contacts. We used the telephone to call people there who requested, they said they were all right with receiving calls from us in the United States. We would call them on the telephone to tell them we hadn't forgotten them, we were working for them, and if they had anything that they wanted to say, we would make sure that everyone heard. And so they would sometimes give us appeals, or they would tell us news of what had happened to their friends and colleagues who might have been arrested, or who had been sent to the labor camps, or who was being threatened, who was losing their job. We would take the information and we would release it to the press, and we would give it again to our senators and congressmen and ask them to do something to help these people. And it mushroomed, so person-to-person contacts. We would send visitors to when people said they were going on a vacation to the former Soviet Union to tour it, we would ask, well, while you're there, do you mind just taking one evening and take a taxi over to some Jewish activists there, and would you mind just giving them these Hebrew books and maybe giving them a copy of different things they were requesting? And once in a while, then they would give these tourists a letter to send out saying, could you please send this to our friends there, mail it when you get to the States, or they would send out something they had written that they would like us to distribute. And it went back and forth like that, person to person. Letters, telephone, visitors, everything was person to person. These were real people, and we wanted to know them as real people.
Awesome. So you actually went to Russia. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with that?
So we went to this, I've been to the Soviet Union once and to Russia twice after the end of the Soviet Union. Yeah. In 1974, my girlfriend and I, when we were sophomores in college, I think it was the summer after our sophomore year, actually, between sophomore and junior year, we went for a little over 2 weeks to the former Soviet Union, and we went there to meet with the Jewish activists in 4 different cities. And we brought things with us, and most of all, we went there just to meet them and hear what was going on, try to understand for ourselves. We ended up meeting a tremendous number of activists while we were there. I remember we met over 50 in our first stop in Kiev. We essentially had 3 days there, and our day in the former Soviet Union, you weren't allowed to travel freely unless you had an in-tourist official government tour agency guide with you. So you had to go in a tour group, or if you were going in a private car, it had to be with an in-tourist guide. You couldn't just go around on your own. But we left our tour group each morning after breakfast. We were with a British tour group there, and we would just disappear, leave them, and we would go take a taxi to wherever we want, and we would go visit activists. And we went from apartment to apartment all day long and way into the night. We'd get back late into the hotel and then start again the next day and look in on people. We had messages from people we were looking in on how they were doing and learning about their situation and different things. And after I think 4 days or so in Kiev, we had been invited to come to a party it was being held in honor of the impending emigration of a fairly well-known filmmaker there who had gotten a visa. He was a Jewish filmmaker and was going to be leaving, so there was a party for his departure, farewell party. And the word had gotten around Kiev that there were Americans there who were willing to receive their stories and try to help. And a lot of people came, a lot. We met activist after activist. There was one woman who came and who brought a psychiatrist to explain to us how this man had been arrested and then put against his will in a psychiatric hospital and forcibly medicated because of the letters he was writing. And he was being held for 3 years in a psychiatric hospital. There was another woman whose fiancé had been arrested and was given a 10-year sentence, and she brought someone with her to explain to us what had happened to him in prison. There was any number of activists who brought appeals, and we were accepting whatever they gave us, but we would first go outside with them and just walk outside to receive it, and then we tried to photograph whatever we were given so that in case we lost the originals and something happened. And we would keep all of the so-called contraband, these things, and our film in we would keep it in a shoulder bag, and because we expected we might be arrested. So we heard that somebody had inquired about us, and we thought we were about to be arrested. So we had identified another young woman from our tour group who kept asking questions about us, and she seemed very sympathetic, and she was just saying things about things we were interested in, but we were sort of keeping our distance from her. And we said, if you'd like to help, we have something you can do to help, and come with us. She came with us, and we said, we have to give you a bag. It doesn't have anything illegal in it, but it contains letters and things for publication. It contains our film from our cameras. And we gave her instructions, and we asked her to please leave the tour group today, stay away until the plane leaves later today. We're about to be arrested. We're going to disappear. And if you'll please, there's instructions in here for how to take care of this. We had set up in advance that each day we would send a telegram saying we were okay to our family. It was, and the telegram would either say happy birthday, or maybe if we were in trouble, it was supposed to say condolences on the death of your sister or something. And so we asked her, we put money in there, and we asked her to go to the phone office and send a telegram to a place we said, saying condolences on the death of your sister, so that we knew people in the United States would know we were about to disappear into we didn't know where, the Gulag or prison or whatever. And so she agreed to take the bag, so when we were searched after our arrest, we didn't have it, which was nice. And she kept it until we left the Soviet Union for us, and then gave it back to us once we were in England. We were able to get everything out. But we were arrested, we were interrogated, they told us there'd be a trial in a few weeks. They said we were facing charges of conspiracy to commit anti-Soviet slander and felony theft. They said we had stolen a gold ring and a camera. They said it was ridiculous. And received a notebook containing anti-Soviet documents. All right, I'll grant you. And they acted like there'd be a trial. But then at the end of the couple of days, they let us go back to our tour group. They said, we'll pick you back up for trial in 10 days. And they showed us the documents. When we got to Moscow and had begun to calm down and think, what should we do next? We actually went to the Jewish activists in Moscow, and we said, we've been arrested. There's going to be a trial next week. What do you think we should do? They said, what you need is a press conference for your protection. So they arranged a press conference with Murray Seeger from the LA Times Washington Post News Service, and he took our story and said that he would be at our plane when we were supposed to leave Leningrad. If we didn't get on the plane, he would make sure that the news was spread far and wide and that he would get help for us. But otherwise, he wouldn't release it while we were in the Soviet Union. And we think that's what helped protect us. So, and then we were able to get out eventually. And
definitely a very brave tale. Thank you for sharing. That's about all the time we have, unfortunately. But that was Dr. Sheldon Benjamin, Professor of Psychiatry and Neurology at the University of Massachusetts. And this is Emily Livaday for The Global Current.
Thank you again for tuning in to this week's episode of The Global Current. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. I'm Alexander Graham.
And I'm Jillian Lope.
Same time,
same place, next week.
The Global Current is brought to you by the School of Diplomacy and International Relations at Seton Hall University. Our executive producer is Liam Scollins, our associate producer is Morgan Mount, our news editor is John Trudeau, our analysis editor is Marissa Hutton, our technical producer is Trevor West, and our interview segment is produced by Emily Livaday. The Global Current theme song is Acid Jazz by Kevin MacLeod. You've been listening to The Global Current on WSOU 89.5 FM, Seton Hall's Pirate Radio.